Good morning, everybody. I'm Koebel Price, and I am a senior advisor with the National Democratic Institute, which is well represented here by my colleagues. As I think has been made clear, NDI is a very large non-governmental organization based in Washington, but we're primarily out in the field around the world. We have about, I think, 85 countries in which we're currently active, and we promote democracy, development democracy assistance primarily through democratizing internally and externally political parties, working with the institutes of government to be more representative and effective, ensuring free and fair elections, and then my specialty, which is civil society and citizen participation within politics. And in my role, I'm fortunate to be able to work in Washington, but also spend a significant amount of time in the field working with our programs, also conducting research on what other organizations are doing, trying to capture lessons learned on citizen participation in civil society and politics, and then really appreciate being able to come and meet with people like you who are asking some of the same questions, implementing very interesting programs on the ground. I just wanted, what my presentation is about is a project that I spearheaded about a year ago, brought in some of my colleagues, Katrin, who will meet next, and Lindsay, who's over there. But our citizen participation team in Washington and our ICT team in Washington put together a grant to try and answer some of the questions that we've all heard here over the past couple of days, and probably talk a lot about over coffee and beers with our friends. And for us, you know, my team is always asking the questions: what is participation? What participation matters politically? What participation enhances democratic development or establishes and deepen democratic practices? Again, we work in developing democracies, so that context is going to be different in each of those countries, and certainly different than it is here in North America. In this particular project, we took a look over the past 3 years or so of programs that NDI had developed where we said specifically to our donors, ICT will be used as sort of the fulcrum to enhance citizen participation in politics. There are many of them at NDI. We have a lot of different donors. So we did a desktop review, tried to capture some lessons learned with interviews there, and we selected a number of countries and a number of programs to do case studies. And as this indicates, 3 of those, which are complete, are Mexico, Uganda, and Burma. So we sent teams to those countries to take a look at our programs, to take a look at the political context, the ICT context, and understand and evaluate to some extent what other organizations were doing. And we're, just as it says here, we're going through a process of internal discussions and reviews and some external peer review sessions over time, with the end result that we will produce a toolkit so those who are interested in the kinds of questions we all seem to be interested in that brought us here will be able to better understand how ICT might be used to achieve their goals in citizen engagement programs in the future. At NDI, we have, in my team in particular, you know, we do have to answer questions, particularly as we design programs to assist organizations and individuals to participate, like what kind of participation matters, as I mentioned. And over many years, I'll spare all the boring details, but we developed what we call our theory of change. And so, as we're known to say, and annoy our colleagues back in DC, different participation matters differently, right? Pretty much a grasp of the amazingly obvious. But what our research says is that you have to consider 3 particular domains of participation. That we talk a lot about voice, but citizen voice has a lot of different elements need to be considered, particularly if you're providing help to organizations and individuals to increase the effectiveness of their voice. And then you must consider the political spaces and openings, the entry points and opportunities to express those voices, and how do you reach out to establish government accountability and responsiveness. So over the course, I did not do that intentionally, my apologies. So we disaggregate that because we have to, again, provide particular assistance to individuals and organizations that are trying to increase citizen voice. So very briefly, what we think, and our research indicates is important, is there's basic citizenship competencies. They need to understand the role of different political actors, the role of citizens, as is well discussed here. Citizens need access to information. They need access to information in a way that's usable to them. Typically, associations and CSOs are an important aggregator of those voices for effectiveness. And then they need to be credible and to some extent build the strength of those voices to have an impact in politics. So when we look at our programs, we look at each of these particular areas in terms of evaluating and providing assistance. In political space, we talk about they need to be able to access them. Oops, If I can go back, I think, yes. Pardon me. There we go. So they need to be accessible, we know that. They need to be meaningful. We heard just this morning about, is a 2-minute speech meaningful? I don't know. Oftentimes it's actually not. In our work, oftentimes it's a town hall meeting where the MP comes and talks and a few citizens ask questions, and we call that participation. That's not a particularly meaningful engagement. Similarly, though, civil society and citizens need to take advantage of spaces that are there and occupy them. So it's not enough to have a Freedom of Information Act unless somebody's using the Freedom of Information Act for positive outcomes. And as I forget your name, you talked about the relationships that are built in those spaces being one of the key outcomes. So on to accountability. We talk about it's important for citizens and civil society groups to identify the political will and the capacity of different government entities to be able to actually respond to their requests and their needs. And in our work, that's often not understood. Demands go to the wrong places with lack of capacity. It builds animosity. And rather than accountability, we always talk about the need to build responsiveness. I mean, you don't get from no accountability to 100% accountability without something happening in between. So we talk about the need to establish democratic norms of government should respond, and if that just means providing information, that's a good first step. So moving on to, this is what I'm really looking for feedback on, and I'll move through it quickly in the interest of time. So our evaluation in these 3 particular case studies in sort of disaggregating by voice space and accountability is that almost all the programs that we've evaluated that use ICT to engage citizens vastly overestimate the ability, oops, my own timer says I'm a little bit long. They vastly overestimate where citizens are in their ability to understand information and to make it actionable, so they're missed. And this really furthers a dynamic where citizens are seen as consumers, government is a provider, and it's essentially, I always talk about it as, was the meal good at the restaurant? When really our work is about, we should be setting the menu. The information, clearly in the programs we looked at, there's a lot more information for citizens to access, but again, it's not understood, except in some cases where we see that it is used for greater evidence, so greater credibility of citizen voices as they engage in policy. They maybe understand how policy is made better. But the biggest, I think, takeaway from this is that the lack of aggregation, there's very little strength being added right now through the use of ICT in these programs because they're individual voices. They're not aggregated. That mitigates the strength, and in particular, civil society groups and NGOs are not using information and communication technologies to build legitimacy with citizens and to build their political base. They're just pushing information out and doing what they often do, which is being capital-based actors who are their own political elites. On political space, clearly a lot of new spaces are being created, but as has been mentioned in a lot of groups, there's really not dialogue and deliberation happening in these spaces. And for our programs, that's where citizenship really occurs, the ability to negotiate, to compromise, to learn how to be a democratic actor. It happens in those spaces, and that's not happening online. And I know that's a big issue for a lot of us here. Citizen expectations are very often too high. If they have access to these spaces and access to information, they think somehow magically something is going to change. It's not information deficits in most countries that create politics the way they are. It's a power analysis. Importantly for us, almost everybody we talk to is enthusiastic about new spaces, new opportunities, new technologies, but they're frightened of them and they don't know how to negotiate them effectively. Lastly, and I realize I'm over time, so thank you. On a bit of a positive side too, ICTs are really establishing in the programs we looked at sort of new norms, and again, it's about this responsiveness. In a lot of countries we looked at, members of parliament now know that they're being looked at, and the information about whether they show up for work, whether they talk about the important subject matters, whether they're there for a vote, or whether they go to their constituencies and interact with citizens in a meaningful way, sort of the fundamental role of a representative in a legislature. That information is now available to citizens, and in some cases that's actually being used effectively, so we do see some positive changes in legislators and legislatures along the way. A particular downside, and I'll end on this, that I've seen in my research on this, in a lot of countries we work in, whether it's former Soviet countries or places coming out of war, civil society acts as opposition. And whoever in government, they think it's their role to sort of play gotcha politics. Rather than come with solutions, understanding policy, try to build relationships, I think it's their role oftentimes to find what the government is doing wrong, point that out, embarrass them, and get a new government. The ability of information and communication technology to access new information and to do it very quickly is perpetuating that. So in many cases, it's moving, we think, further away from the democratization goals that a lot of our programs have. And we need to work a lot more with our partner organizations, our NGOs and CSOs, to understand the long game, rather than just now that budgets are available or MP performance is available, we can point out all their flaws and mistakes and embarrass them publicly. That does not further anybody's goals. So lastly, as I mentioned, this is an ongoing project. Of those who looked at the paper, we have preliminary findings, but over the next 6 to 12 months, we'll have a lot more research, we'll have some events. If there's anybody who's interested in talking with us about this, or if you're doing your own research, we'd really love some feedback and information. Thank you.